And welcome to everybody that's here. First thing, we got 7, right? So the first thing we need to do is approve our rules for this year. This is our first meeting of the Ethics Committee, and I am Chairman Sam Watson, so thank y'all for being here. These should be very similar to last year, and many of you served on this committee last year, so at this time I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. All right, rules are approved. All right, first up, I've actually got a bill myself, so I'm gonna turn this over to my vice chair, the senator from the 25th. I tell you what, let's say a prayer real quick before we get started. I'm getting ahead of myself. Senator, you mind doing a prayer? 10.
All right. Lord, we thank you for the goodness of God. And Father, that we're here today alive and well, and we live in America. And Father, we live in the state of Georgia. We ask, oh Father, that you would give us wisdom and discernment, dear Lord, as we represent the people of Georgia. And Father, that we would trust you with all of our heart. And Father, to do the right thing for the people. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, I'm going to move down front and turn it over to my vice chair.
All right, Chairman Watson, we've got Senate Bill 199, LC 473331.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate y'all letting me do this. This is a department bill, and I've got our director, executive secretary, David Amati, with me here to help answer all the hard questions. But it's an effort just to kind of streamline things, make things easier for all of us involved in this process, and just to simplify things at the end of the day. It gets pretty complicated with all of the reporting that we have going on. So I'm going to just kind of run through the bill real quick, and then may let David chime in at any time if I say something wrong, but it's pretty straightforward. If you'll begin in section 1, this is dealing with complaints, and we're just moving to a 60-day period instead of the current 30-day period to allow a little more time for those complaints to be filed prior to an election. Section 2, beginning on line 36, this is the largest section of the bill. This is where we're returning the local filing obligations back to the state. I think at one time they were at the state, and then we moved it back to the state. We're now moving those back to the state, so you can see where we removed that language, and you can see that we've put it back in, moving it to the state on lines 106 there. Second thing it does in this section, if you'll look at lines 234 to 290, that will begin on January 1st, 2027, by the way. The local piece, yes. The 234, this is dealing with campaign committee disclosures, and we're going to go to quarterly, as you can see there, just to try to make things a whole lot easier. It puts uniformity in election years and non-election years, still have the same grace period, and the reports are still close to primary and general elections for folks that want to look at that. If you continue to turn on through, lines 315 to 399 is dealing with our PACs, doing the same thing there, putting them on a quarterly reporting time period, and also requiring them to have separate checking accounts, just like our campaigns do. Also, same section, we're have a little piece here on our retired members and defeated candidates, basically putting them on the same reporting period. Currently retired officials have more reporting than folks that actually lose or even, and they're both out of office. So just trying to, again, put them on quarterly and clean that up for those candidates that retire or lose. Continuing on, Section 3. This is dealing with our personal financial disclosures, moving them to report on April 1st of every year, instead of alternating between either 7 or 15 days post-qualifying in election years, and July 1st of non-election years. And you'll see those changes in there. It also creates.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
And we did want to make sure that this financial disclosure in election years came before the primary election. So in settling on the date, I couldn't think of a better day than April Fool's Day for your financial disclosure reports. I just wanted to point that out.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, jump in anytime if I say something. 560, that's the ranges. Before I go to that, let me get, so we also put on 482, there's some language there dealing with local officials, basically requiring them to sign and agree to have training if they're elected. And we're just putting that into statute to make sure that they understand that they've been elected, and they now need to take a little bit of training to understand what their role is and their job is.
And I think GMA's here and some other folks, but this was a request from ACCG and GMA that we agreed to put in. It's already required training, but it's just an acknowledgement up front that they, if elected, they'll do it. So.
Moving on to lines 564, we're putting in some ranges for the financial disclosures instead of an exact amount. Just another thing to try to simplify reporting. I know it gets difficult when years end and exactly where things are.
And that only applies to the statewide officials. It doesn't necessarily apply to y'all. If you're running for governor, lieutenant governor, AG, ag, et cetera, they have an enhanced financial disclosure that doesn't apply to anyone else.
All right, Section 4 is dealing with redacting the home address for public officials and candidates for office. And then Section 5 is for our friends in the halls, dealing with their reporting, to move them to once a month, every month, by the 5th day of the month. It's also collapsing their different types of reports into one report. So I know they'll appreciate that. I think theirs is pretty complicated to keep up with.
And if there's lobbyist acts that you want to go look at and say, okay, what have they been lobbying? Right now you may have to sift through 5 different reports for 5 different types of lobbying for the same 15 days. From a transparency standpoint for the public, it should just all be in one report for the month of January. So that's sort of the intent here, is to make it easier to access.
Okay. That kind of winds out the bill. We do actually have one friendly amendment that should be in your folders, dealing with the municipal candidates and their dates, and I'll let David touch on that. So
we didn't notice this till yesterday, but Gabrielle actually pointed out we had missed it. I'm really glad they did. We're setting the financial disclosure dates for April 1st of every year, whether it's election or non-election year, to just make it consistent. But the only type of elected official that doesn't qualify in March is actually municipal officers. They don't qualify till August. So if we leave the April date for them, we're effectively creating a system where non-incumbents don't have to file financial disclosures in election years. So we're moving it to September 1st for them, right after qualifying, similar to how we're doing it for everyone else.
And that amendment's AM 470136.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Should have it in your folders.
right. Any questions? Let's see, number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about the complaints section that we have, and I think it's maybe the first section. What type of complaints are we talking about that would not be able to be introduced until 60 days out?
So right now, under regulation, we don't accept a complaint from anyone within 30 days of the election. The idea being, it's just weaponized sort of political theater. We're going to file it 31 days out, knowing there's not possibly enough time for the commission to sift through and dismiss it. And then, the filer, and it's not always the case, but often we see it that close to the election, they wave it around saying, look, they've got ethics violations, how corrupt, you should vote for me. Yeah. We're proposing expanding that to 60 days for 2 reasons. One, I think it disincentivizes a little bit of that, but two, to the extent it still will happen, we've got a whole other month where maybe we can sift through it and dismiss those frivolous complaints before people go to the polls.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you. Just a question, does the department have a time period, once, let's say a complaint's filed or whatever, that they respond to that? Is there a time period that you're giving us a time period, so I'm giving you a time period back, that you respond back when there is a complaint or something of that nature?
So if a complaint comes in against an elected official, we notify that official immediately, and then we give them 30 days to respond to us. So the first step is, if you think this is frivolous, tell us how, and we'll take that information in before we really even begin the investigation. From that stage, do you mean in terms of how long till the case has to be resolved?
Correct. If I give you the answer to the complaint, when do you make a decision, and do you have a time frame in which you do that?
There's not a legal required time frame, but I can tell you, I think less than 10% of our cases are resolved within less than 18 months, and probably 90% of our cases are resolved within 6 to 9 months. I don't think we have but a couple, and the cases, let me be clear, the cases that are not resolved relatively expeditiously generally are because there's litigation involved. Maybe someone's suing us to challenge the enforcement of a statute. Maybe someone is appealing the constitutionality of something. It's very rare that we have cases, and that's not always been the case at the commission, I concede that. But from 7 years ago today, we've significantly reduced that backlog to a pretty tight window.
Timing is important, though, from a standpoint of what's going on when you're dealing with these things, and that's why I was asking.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I had one. Does this address what lobbyists are able to spend on meals or anything like that? Is that in this bill?
It is not, Senator.
Okay, didn't. Okay. Let's see, number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you all for putting some protections in here for addresses. I'm deeply grateful for that. And at the same time, I do want to ask, how will this impact people being able to do challenges for residencies?
So we are not removing the requirement that you have to tell the Ethics Commission the personal residence. What we're doing is restricting that from public view just on our forms, not anywhere else, not tax assessors, anything like that. What I would say is, this is my 7th year here at the commission, feels a lot longer.
I can imagine.
I would say 100%. I would say 100%, and the hairline's going with it. I'd say 100% of the residency challenges we've seen, and we do work with the SOS division when they reach out. I'd say 100% of the challenges we see are not based on Ethics Commission filings. They're either someone who lives in the district and knows, John doesn't live where he's saying he's living, or it's candidly someone from an opponent campaign staff that's filing it. So I don't think this would really have any real world impact on those residency challenges.
Great. Again, I'm thankful that you're hiding our addresses. Really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I'll just point out, I said this in Athens at Biennial. 10, 15 years ago, I would have been opposed to a concept like this. But I think within days of us talking about it, someone died in a swatting incident in Georgia. We're seeing this way too often, and I just think it's time for us to do something about it before someone gets really hurt.
Any other questions of the author? Chair will open the will of the committee.
We need the motion.
Have a motion do pass
We got the-
and a second.
We need the amendment too.
Okay, was there anybody signed up to speak on this one? Mr. Favorito,
Do we want
do you want to come speak on this?
Yes, sir, just very, very quick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Garland Favorito, co-founder of Voter GA. We have about 20,000 supporters and statewide, and been kind of leading the election integrity movement here in Georgia for 20 years. We fully support this bill. We appreciate both the chair and Mr. Amati for bringing it. Just had one suggestion, actually, or maybe two, for a friendly amendment. As Mr. Amati said, that there is a lot of weaponization of candidates opposing, following fake ethics complaints amongst one another. And one thing that would help here is I'm going to call your attention to line 34, where it says in the 60 days immediately prior to an election. I think Mr. Amati is favorable for these two amendments, but we would just say after the qualification date. So once the qualification period has started, there shouldn't be ethics complaints coming in at that time to give them a little bit more time to resolve those. It's effectively the equivalent of 80 days versus 60 days. So that would be one suggestion. The other suggestion is that the commission shall not, this would be our proposal for D, and the Legislative Council could probably clarify this. It says the commission shall not accept a complaint made against a candidate from a campaign staff member of an opposition candidate. What we saw in the last election was fake complaints. Representative Kahan was victimized by a fake ethics complaint. I think she might be here to testify about that. But she was allegedly called that she was a lobbyist and didn't disclose it. In reality, she was a volunteer advocacy. She has never actually received any money. So this would close a loophole. I think Mr. Amati was favorable for those, and I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the committee before you, as a possible friendly amendment that you don't have in front of you.
Okay, we have a 24-hour rule on this, on the amendment, so
Got
we
it.
would have to have that for us on the amendment.
Okay.
But thank you for your participation
Sure.
and thank you for your input. Mr. Patel?
I'll be very brief. Rushi Patel with the Georgia Municipal Association. I've also been authorized by ACCG because they had a conflict this morning to express both of our organizations' support for this legislation. We appreciate the chairman and Mr. Amati working with us and bringing forth a good bill.
Thank you. Representative Kahan? Is she here?
I think she has to leave.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second on the underlying bill, Senate Bill 199, and we have an amendment. So at this time, we'll hear a motion on that amendment.
Do pass.
Second.
Have a motion and a second on the amendment do pass. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So carry. So the bill has been amended, so now we have a motion and a second on the original bill as amended. And any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So carry. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman,
Thank
members of
you.
the committee.
Thank you.
All right, next up, have the senator from the 29th, SB 175. Whatever you want to do, Mr. Whip.
I'll stay next to the President Pro Tem so he can feed me information.
Sounds good. Sounds good. See, what number are you, Mr. Whip? All right, floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the President Pro Tem for all of his hard work on tort reform. Now, if you'll look at SB 175, I think everybody on the committee is familiar with SB 175. We had the discussion in this room last year, and what it does is it works on prohibiting the use of ranked choice voting with exceptions. And we have discussed in the past our concern about ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting has been used in many areas. It's used in Alaska, used in San Francisco, used in the city of New York, and what we've seen it used for intentionally or unintentionally is to disenfranchise citizens by the fact of presenting an extremely complicated system of voting where citizens go into the poll and they receive a ballot. And in some areas, if you look in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, citizens received a ballot that had over 67 choices in one particular race. And I think if any state understands voter fatigue, it's the state of Georgia. With all the work we've done, everything from SB 202 to many of the bipartisan things we've put into place to make our state probably an example to the rest of the country of what a strong voter turnout is. And we've been dealing with voter ethics and election reform before 2016 election. And so what this does, with the exception, and I think we all want to protect our friends in the military, what this does is it continues to maintain the system we use of runoff elections. And it does away with the opportunity for ranked choice voting, because what we have discovered in the states that have it is there's ballot fatigue where citizens will go through. I had a really good friend of mine run for Congress in Orange County, California. And under the ranked choice voting system, he got the results of his race about 14 days after the election was over. At one time, it was he and one other person from the other party. And on the 13th day, that flipped, and it was two individuals from the other party. And, of course, he was pushed out. And many of his those that supported him and those that supported the second place individual felt explained in the after action of the election that it was a very confusing process for them to understand how to rank individuals, especially in partisan races where they knew somebody was a member of one party and somebody was a member of the other party. We have discovered, and we have cases in New York City where several of the borough presidents came out because of the confusion with ranked choice voting in campaigns, where their elder citizens and some of the, and we have to be delicate with this, those not necessarily educated within the election process, new voters will come out and be confused or get frustrated over receiving ballots with 16, 17, and 45 individual people running for office that they had to rank from 1 through 45. And so what this does here, it maintains the system we currently have so that I, as a Republican, if I have two opponents, I have to go out there and beat both those opponents by 50 plus. And if I do not, then I go into a into a runoff and have to defeat that opponent in a runoff. While I understand our Secretary of State's office is a little concerned in their opinion, which mine differs somewhat, in the cost of runoffs, I fear the cost of not having runoffs. Our citizens want to see very clear, very straightforward elections. We don't need tricks and shenanigans. So with that, I would ask the committee once again, as you did last year, to support this legislation so we can get it to the Rules Committee.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wilk. And if I remember right, it passed out of this committee unanimously last year and on the Senate floor.
It does, and I will yield to Senator Jackson because I believe we did have discussion on the military side, and I think there may have been one or two dissenting votes when it came out of committee. It did pass out of our. It did pass off the floor and over to the House with a very strong majority vote. But as the chairman knows, when things get over to the House, everybody gets confused.
All right. Thank you. All right, questions. Number 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, to Legislative Council, is there anywhere ranked choice voting already happens under statute other than UOCAVA? Because I'm not familiar that ranked choice voting happens in Georgia currently. I'm just trying to get a baseline for it so I can understand. Maybe Legislative Council could educate me on that. I'm just asking.
Anybody got anything? Stuart?
Stuart probably wrote it.
No, sir. Other than the UOCAVA ballots, ranked choice voting is not provided for anywhere in the election code, and therefore it's not, really available to be used by any state or municipal elections.
All right, thank you. All right, number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Whip. Just a question or concern I want to raise for you around this bill. So our UOCAVA voters do instant runoffs, is another way to call ranked choice voting. Are they somehow more equipped, are they smarter, more capable than a local municipality when it comes to being able to do ranked choice voting? I guess my question is, if it's good for the folks who live overseas and who are serving our country, who come from Georgia, if it's good enough for them, why are we making this not an option for, say, a local municipality in the future?
I think, and if I hear your question, you're asking why we do it for those individuals overseas and we wouldn't do it for individuals here.
That's correct.
I think what we're doing is we're looking at individuals who have different capabilities. They have different access. I think the simple response is everybody who serves our country and everybody who is deployed or we make exceptions for. We make exceptions for in multiple areas. But I think right here is the confusion that's caused by the masses, and we're not looking at the same numbers when we're talking about the individuals that are not here in the state of Georgia but who can legally vote in the state of Georgia. We're looking at much smaller numbers, and if you'll look at the recent ranked choice fiasco in Alaska in their last election and look at the times it took for votes to come back in, not letting California off with anything, because we know in the congressional and even in the presidential race, California was weeks behind everybody else in reporting. And I think for the state of Georgia and all the progress we've made, the last thing we need is this fly in the ointment to give somebody the opportunity to push us back into the chaos that both parties have experienced since 2016.
May I follow up? So I would agree with you in terms of federal and state elections that we are not in a place in Georgia where we want to put a fly in the ointment, if you will. I am concerned about why we are making it so that local municipalities, after they do their research and all those things, might not be able to offer that. Because I'm very aware that it's very costly for a municipality. For example, I represent a very small municipality. They only have 500 registered voters. Every time they vote, it's expensive. When they have to do a runoff, that's an additional cost that they have to take on. Whereas if they did ranked choice, and they only have 500 folks, so they're not going to have 57 people on the ballot. You know, they're talking about ranked choice voting for 3 or 4 candidates. And so I'm just concerned about why we are taking away local control in that local option for a local municipal election.
Well, I represent several small municipalities, one of them being the municipality of Woodbury. And I went and stood with them while they recalled their mayor, held special elections, had state troopers come in to help make sure everything ran smoothly. And so I understand the concern that that the senator has as far as some of these smaller municipalities. But I think the much more important question is that we run clean, clear, and transparent elections. The citizens of Woodbury who were standing out there voting that night, not one time on either side did they discuss the costs that they were putting in there, but what they did discuss was a fair opportunity for them to vote and get a mayor out of office so that they could then again, a few months later, hold an election to elect a new mayor. And I think that the benefit of that far outweighs what we'll find. And I know the vice chair is probably has conducted more elections than anybody in this room, understands the value of that.
Number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback off my colleague from the 41st, I do have a concern around the fact that we would be removing an option from municipal elections that could potentially save money. But if no election in the state has been held using ranked choice voting and no one's talking about it, as the senator from the 2nd has pointed out, then why proactively ban it before we even know what the landscape would be like in Georgia? I know you've mentioned that there are several states like California and New York. There are also several Republican states that have employed this for decades and continue to do it. For very good reasons. So why hamstring our local governments when this is not really even an issue that has been raised in the state as a concern? Well,
in as much respect I have for my senator and attorney friend, it is being discussed, and the next time you're in Muskogee County, I'll be happy to sit you down with some citizens who brought it to me. A former citizen of Alaska who has a serious concern about ranked choice voting. But I think what we have discovered on both sides of this this building is that there are sometimes proactive is much better than reactive. Reactive is the issue I dealt with the citizens of Woodbury, where they elected the wrong person who got in there. And if you want to compare it, I know there's a mayor up in Illinois that gets a whole lot of TV time about the way once they got into office, how they turned it into a nightmare. And citizens want easy access to elections, and they do not want confusing elections. And while I would not debate the fact that if we sat down and looked at cost, I don't think there's a huge difference in the cost. But I think if you go out and ask every citizen, how valuable is your vote? I think they could easily justify the cost of being able to vote in an election where everything is clear and understanding. But I know, some of my constituents and some of your friends are the same people, and I would love to give you the opportunity to hear that when we can get together, because it is a concern for some individuals in my district.
Yeah, just to clarify.
You still good? Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, what I meant was, are there any municipalities, counties, talking about it? And yes, citizens. Yeah. Citizens raise those concerns. Citizens also raise concerns, and I appreciate the fact that you're concerned about voter confusion on this instance. There are many other instances where we have introduced measures that would confuse and has confused voters, that I would be happy to work with you to eliminate those barriers.
And anything I can do, I'm more than willing to do that, Senator.
Number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment to address the senator's concern over costs. In prior legislation, SB 189 allowed local municipalities, local governments to conduct elections without having to go through a full expense cycle. So, for example, they could utilize, in some cases, a paper ballot. So in my case, I had I had a runoff in a local commission seat where there were less than, as you suggest, 500 voters. So in order to reduce the cost of that runoff, municipalities and local governments have that option as long as there's not a federal race on the ballot or a state race on the ballot. So we are addressing that cost concern. I am aware of that. I'm certainly sensitive to that. But at the end of the day, I agree with my good friend from Columbus. The election results themselves outweigh the potential challenges that we have with administration.
Thank you. Number 9, Vice Chair here.
All right. I just wanted to point out, too, you talking about the cost of elections. Watch and see how many school boards, county commissioners run a T-splosh election by itself. They'll call for that election by itself. They disregard the cost of the election. That's not in their thinking. They're looking at ways to get it passed. And we've all seen that many times on a special election. Rather than waiting and holding the election with other elections, they'll do a special one. Just wanted to remind y'all about that too. I've seen that many times. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and we did drop a piece of legislation last year addressing that. I think that was Senator Jackson again will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was one that was unanimous, where we said that SPLOST campaigns had to be run in conjunction with others to try to prevent people from manipulating. Especially these where they'll hold a SPLOST election in July when everybody's on vacation and try to get them in. So that was something that was unanimous that we all agreed on.
All right. Thank you. Any more questions from the committee? We good? All right. We do have a few folks signed up to speak. Just due to time, let's try to keep it to about 2 minutes or less. First person is Garland Favorito, voter GA.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can tell you that almost every one of our 20,000 members would support Senator Robertson's bill. There's a lot of lobbyist money that is going against this bill, but the people, the citizens, as Senator Robertson says, are in favor of it. I do want to just, again, I understand we're within the 24-hour limit, so I will take this off for later, but wanted to suggest a problem that we could actually make this even better and address some of the concerns that have been raised. But that is, there's currently an equal protection violation that's looming here because the Secretary of State has implemented a different form of method for uniform and overseas voting than they did with the other voting. So I would suggest, as a possibility for maybe a future consideration, was to just simply ban ranked choice voting completely in the state of Georgia, including Uwakava, and then deliver the ballots to Uwakava and return them via express delivery and have the state pick up the cost for that. And that way you would eliminate a suit for equal protection by any Uwakava voter who is not going to be available to participate in a runoff in the same way that we can right now. So that would just be my suggestion for the future, and I can give you that, Senator, offline.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Next, we have Ben Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Runoffs are both a solution and a problem to the issue of getting a majority support in our state. They cost roughly $75 million every time we do them at a statewide level, and that's based off a study that was done by Kennesaw State that analyzed the 2020 elections. And in my home city of Atlanta, we just saw an election this November with a drop of 92% in voter turnout from the first election to the second one, which I hardly think qualifies as a representative sample of the voters. You're basically limiting the people who get to decide to the highly engaged people. RCV is the only option that allows for both an efficient election system with majority winners, which is already being used for the one exception that this bill already makes. 6 Georgia localities ranging from Athens, Clark, and Doraville to Holly Springs and Johns Creek have passed resolutions asking for permission to use this simple solution for their elections. And this bill really accomplishes nothing legally to change the status quo and only succeeds at unnecessarily dissuading municipalities that lean left and right from pursuing their own solutions to the issues that directly affect their ability to address real issues in their communities that their taxpayers are forced to foot the bill for.
Thank you. Scott Turner.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee, friends. It's good to see you. I love seeing a smiley Randy Robertson this early in the morning.
First time I've seen him smile.
I usually have that effect on Randy, so if you ever want to see him smile, just put him in close proximity. Thank you this morning for talking about this important issue. Coming from it from a different point of view, and respectfully, some of the things that I've heard this morning really fit into a pattern that I've identified in the 4 years I've been working on this issue. And the opposition to ranked choice voting can be fit into 2 categories, mainly. The largest of those 2 categories are demonstrably false arguments. I didn't really hear a whole lot of those this morning, so I'll stay away from those, but there's a lot of misinformation about ranked choice voting in general. The second category, which is much, much smaller, are problems that have occurred with elections without the additional context around the full story. And we see that repeated quite a bit because the opposition to ranked choice voting likes to pick and cherry pick certain examples and blame ranked choice voting for an outcome that they didn't really like or delays for the election that wasn't the fault of ranked choice voting. And in New York, that's a prime example. So we'll talk about the New York example that was discussed earlier today. In New York, one of the reasons why it takes so long to conduct the counting of ballots is because they have a law that requires them to wait a certain period of days, I think it's a week, before they can begin counting ballots. They don't do pre-processing like we do here in Georgia. So they don't start counting even their mail-in absentee ballots until 1 week after Election Day. If you have a postmarked ballot from Election Day, that ballot gets counted. And so they wait for them to come in. The same is true in Alaska. They have a longer period to wait because a lot of their mail service runs through bush pilots in the very small communities. So when we start talking about how ranked choice voting extends the length of elections, and we're looking at these examples, those places have other laws that require them to wait before they can count the ballots. It's not ranked choice voting's fault. One of the other accusations I heard this morning is that people were confused by ranked choice voting in New York. Post-election polling out of New York, 95% of the voters who responded to the poll after they already voted in that ranked choice election for mayor, 95% said that it was easy to understand. And that's because ranked choice voting is a natural part of our behavior. You go into Baskin-Robbins and they're out of vanilla ice cream and that's really what you wanted. Maybe Fudge Ripple will do. It is a natural human behavior to rank. Also, the opposition likes to point to extreme and really old examples. One of those is Burlington, Vermont. I think that's what we were talking about when the third place candidate took over. In Burlington, Vermont, they got rid of it, but then they came back to it. And that's something the opposition doesn't always tell us, is that they actually thought it was a good system. It's just that one time they didn't like the guy that got elected, so they undid it. And then when they realized the benefits of using it, they reinstated it. And then there's Alaska. Alaska is really easy to demagogue because it is not ranked choice voting. It is a much larger reform called Final Four voting, where they have a jungle primary. It was a primary election reform in Alaska. Alaskans were asked if they wanted to keep it. In a narrow margin, they said they wanted to keep it. And what happens there is jungle primary, top 4, you vote for one candidate, the top 4 advance to the general election. And then, only then in the general election do you rank. And under that system, the Republicans there ended up winning everything. Everything. They had an unelectable candidate the first time it was tried in Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin is not popular in Alaska. She's deemed a quitter because she quit in the middle of her gubernatorial term, and she's an embarrassment to many Alaskans. Her in-laws endorsed her Republican opponent in that race, to give you a hint for how unpopular she is there. So Nobody here is talking about Final Four, Final Five. There is no legislation. There is no real big movement behind that. And secondly, there is no bill to advance ranked choice voting in Georgia this year either. There was last year and there was 2 years before that. But right now, what we want to focus on is making sure that you have the facts. And if you have questions about specific examples, I can walk you through all those details. But the most important thing for you to consider as a committee, I think, this morning, is this bill does not change the status quo. As you heard from Legislative Counsel earlier this morning, you can't use it today. There's only one permissible use. Cities can't use it. It would require a change in general code in order to authorize their use of it. So they can't use it today. So this bill does not achieve anything that would change the status quo about ranked choice voting in Georgia. It is effectively banned with the exception of UOCAVA. So that's what I have for you this morning. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I don't see any questions. Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Yep. That's all the folks I have signed up to speak on that. For the committee's reference, there are 2 letters in the back of your folders here in support of Senate Bill 175, the Heritage Action for America and Honest Elections Project. If you would like to review those, they're both in support of this bill. Okay. Yeah, one of these did not make it to your folder, but I have a copy of it if you would like to review it. Sorry, apologize. It's right here. But that's the one on the Heritage Action for America, James Quarles. So, all right, any more questions or comments? If not, at this time, I'd entertain a motion. Motion to pass. Here's a second. Got a second down there on the end. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? All right, 2 opposed. Got it. All right. You got a bill, Mr. Whip? All righty. Thank you. Next up, Senator from the 31st, Caucus Chairman. You want to present from right there, Mr. Chairman, or you want to come down front and be in the spotlight? All right. I got him on that one.
He loves the spotlight. You only create a spotlight if you pass the bill.
Floor is yours.
Goes back on y'all. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I've asked Tom Rollins to join me. We're going to be brief. This bill is probably familiar to many of y'all, if not all of you. Senate Bill 177. This bill was introduced last year by Senator Williams, and I want to thank him for his work over the last year and helping put this bill back together, I think with a few tweaks. Last year, this bill passed the Senate 52-0, passed the House 161-2, and it was ultimately vetoed by the governor, and I'm going to let Tom kind of talk about why. Hopefully some small changes that gets it over the finish line this year. But just being brief in my comments, this bill addresses 2 significant issues. The first is transparency and representation by lobbyists representing hostile foreign nations and individuals or entities with questionable connections to hostile foreign governments. And second, the funding of protests and political activities by hostile foreign governments and their agents. Around the first issue, why it's important, this requirement takes into consideration that international trade and economic development is a good thing for states, and I think for Georgia, we've seen just with the sheer number of jobs being, number 1 in the country, the impact of what we see in terms of companies moving across the United States or even globally to Atlanta and other parts of the state. And at the same time, it promotes transparency and triggers heightened penalties for those failing to register as agents of a hostile foreign country or its proxies. Secondly, the disclosure of foreign-funded organizations engaging in political activity. Among the political active groups we've seen, such as Code Pink, which reportedly has connections to the CCP and Party of Socialism and Liberation. A communist revolution political party is registered as a political party, but in some states, not all states, that is mainly behind, we've seen around protests and other things around the state this last several years and across the country. In addition, groups, as we've seen across the country, Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and other organizations have played a prominent role in often violent campus takeovers over the last year. They are joined by groups within our Lifetime and Palestinian Youth Movement. These are anti-Israeli organizations that often lack transparency about their funding sources, raising concerns about the potential support of foreign hostile actors, and others, we've seen that are pro-Hamas groups around local chapters of college campuses, and sometimes even receiving funding from student activity fees. At the end of the day, basically this bill, as it was crafted last year, is about transparency, and anyone who is representing potentially hostile foreign nations and foreign dollars that may be coming into place here in the General Assembly. Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me briefly, I'm going to let Tom just kind of talk on what was the specific change to what triggered the veto by the governor, and then we'll yield back to you, if that's okay.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tom Rawlings. I serve sometimes or part-time as the policy director for a group called State Shield. Many of y'all are familiar with Joe Gabbia. And what we've been doing is working around the country on the Chinese influence issue primarily. But this bill has been narrowed significantly. I think the last year's bill, if I recall, actually sort of was considered to have duplicated some of the federal law in terms of banning political contributions. This is all about transparency. I think the two very important aspects of this bill are nonpartisan. Number one, if we have a hostile foreign nation, which they've been defined, they include Iran and China, funding political activity here in the United States, we need to make sure that a lobbyist or other advocate for that nation or its proxies, because we know that a lot of times you have Chinese companies especially that are essentially proxies for the Chinese Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army. Make sure they're registered. And I think the second part is about political activity generally. There is a really frightening article in the Washington Post from last fall, indicating that when President Xi Jinping came to San Francisco for a visit, some of course of the civil rights groups, human rights groups, wanted to express their disapproval of his repression of the Uyghurs, his violence against his own people. And the Chinese government, according to the Washington Post, funded protesters counter-protesters, you might say, to violently crush the human rights advocates. So this bill is all about the transparency in the political process. We of course uphold the idea of free speech, of being able to do whatever folks want to do in terms of saying what they believe. But we also need to know that there are certain times when that speech is being funded by a hostile foreign adversary government or its proxies, that we need to address it. So I think this, having been narrowed in that way, this bill, I believe, should be successful if y'all so agree.
Any questions for the author of the bill? Man, being in the spotlight must have helped. Uh-oh, hold on. Oh, let's see. Number 4.
Well, since you said something, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, a good member of the Jason Caucus, you mentioned several groups that were allegedly funded by foreign hostile nations. Where did you get that proof from? Was it from filings in other states, or where have you seen the money that has been coming into some of these organizations. And then I have to note, disagree on the characterization of some of those organizations. But I just want to get some clarity on the source of the information that you provided.
Well, I appreciate it, Senator Estevez, and I think the rest of the state body, their name was Jason. We'll save that for later. I'm just kidding. I'm going to let Tom kind of talk about what they've seen kind of across the country in terms of some of those organizations and where we've seen money kind of track back to.
Senator, I think the main issue is the main start of that was, number one, the New York Times did a extensive expose on a guy named Neville Roy Singham, who was married to a woman who used to be an advocate, but she now runs Code Pink, and the New York Times, which is not I think a middle of the road publication, reported that it is very likely that Mr. Singham's work in supporting Code Pink and some of the other groups, the Answer Coalition, which Party for Socialism and Liberation is part of that, some of that probably has come from China. And there have been other reports, and I don't have my finger on them right now, but especially regarding, I think the U.S. House Committee, Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and some of the other groups in the U.S. House that were investigating the protests on campus this past year have raised significant concerns about the sources of that funding. Again, the question is not to shut this down. The question, I think people should be able to say what they want to say, but the question is to make sure that this sends a message that if you're going to, whatever your belief is, if you want to accept foreign funding from a hostile foreign government, let's make sure that we tell people where that money is coming from.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for bringing this bill. I did carry it last year, and they refined it and did some things to it and cleaned it up. And I want to thank you very much for bringing this bill forward, and thank you. And at the proper time, I'd like to make a motion.
All right, I'll take that as a motion. Got a second on the end. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, raise your right hand.
Your other right hand.
Any opposed?
I did that too.
Depends on which part of I-16 is it. I-16.
Any opposed?
To be fair, Mr. Chairman, it was just a motion, not do pass or do not pass, just a motion. I was confused.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here.
That was fun.
Yep. Next up, we've got Senate Bill 212. I'm sorry, Mr. Garland. I didn't see you're on here 3 or 4 times, and I thought I had you already. My apologies. All right, floor is, or hold on just a minute. Okay. Yep. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, good to see y'all. First time presenting to the Ethics Committee. Very exciting. We are looking at Senate Bill 212, version LC 479002. This bill protects the information of minors in public schools. It makes sure that no campaign will untruthfully infiltrate a campus, will not try to export data of minors And we're just trying to keep everybody, every minor in our school, no matter their age, free from political campaigns. We already have FERPA, federal rule that prevents the distribution of information from a school system to a third party. What we don't have, and what we found in speaking with our friend Mr. Morelli and Mr. Walker from Ledge Council, most states have laws preventing political campaigns or candidates from going into schools in an untruthful manner. So this bill simply brings to light the fact that campaigns shouldn't do that. And that is really what it boils down to. And the impetus for this was that the first, fourth, and fifth largest school systems in Georgia are in my district. And we received word from numerous parents, administrators, and teachers that there were outside parties trying to get information of students. And so in order to prevent this from ever happening in the future and any of us ever having to think or talk about it again, that we would ensure that we are protecting our kids and we are saying that this is wrong. That's the easiest explanation of it. I can certainly walk through it. I know we're past time, and we've got a few folks that have other committees, myself included, but I'm happy to answer any questions if the committee has any.
All right. I do see a few questions here. Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Still. Just a question about the section where it talks about a person who comes on the public school property. I'm looking at section D, line 42 is where I'm starting, just for your reference.
Right.
So just help me talk this through. So if the Delta Sorority Incorporated, who comes every year to the local high school and does a voter registration drive, if they come on the campus, they'd have to, can they do that anymore? And if they can, it sounds like they have to sign an attestation or something saying they're not affiliated with the campaign. To whom does that go? Where do they get it? How do they know that they need to do this when they've been doing these voter registration campaigns for years? Just talk me through the kind of natural implications of how this would work.
That is an awesome question. And the easiest answer is absolutely, they need to continue doing that. We want them to continue doing that. When any third-party group goes onto a high school campus to register voters, they are also registered with the Secretary of State's office. That data then transmits to the Secretary of State because they're using they're using platforms to do it. So they're doing that in a forward, open discussion of what they're doing. What we can't have, let's say, candidate John Smith recruits high school students to set up voter registration platforms, never registers that with the Secretary of State, never actually registers those kids to vote, gathers that information, harvests the data of children, and then exports it to his campaign. That is what this bill does, is it makes that wrong.
Sure, so I understand exactly why what you've described is wrong, but I don't know that the bill describes exactly what you just described, because to me, so let me clarify my example. So if Delta Sorority Incorporated goes onto a campus and they're doing all their things, they encourage kids to have good character. It's this whole thing that they do, right? But a part of that includes encouraging kids to register to vote. So they're not necessarily registering them, but they're encouraging them to register to vote. Would they have to sign an attestation? And if they do, to whom does it go? Can you still encourage people without registering with the Secretary of State if you're not actually doing registrations?
If you're not doing registrations, then you're not registering with the Secretary of State. And if you look at lines 49 through 52, any person or group acting on behalf of a candidate, campaign committee, political action committee, or political organization. That doesn't include a sorority or a public information group that is just trying to inform children on how to vote and how to perform their civic duties.
But how do you prove that you're not a part of that is one of my questions. But let's put that aside. My other question, if you will still yield. So one of the things that I often am invited to do is to come on school campuses and to talk about civics, to talk about what it is that we do here in the legislature. And of course, a part of my speech is typically to encourage kids to vote. I'm not collecting their data in any way, but I am certainly a part of a political campaign. That's no question about that. We always are, right? And so would we still be able to do that fundamental work of being in public office, encouraging kids to be a part of the civic process by saying, hey, if you're 17 and a half, you should register to vote. If you're 18, please vote.
Absolutely. And if you'll flip back one page to lines 29 and 30, no local school system, public school, or any person acting on behalf of a local school system or public school shall disclose or otherwise provide access to, the key words, student directory information to a candidate or campaign committee. So you're not doing that. When any of us are acting in our official capacity, we've been invited to do so. But what you're not doing, Senator, is walking onto the campus, representing yourself as Governor Kemp and acting in an untoward way to gather kids' information for other purposes.
But line 42, it's section 40, it's section D that makes me concerned about my ability to do this work. Each person who, while located on a public school property of the state, apprises one or more public school students of their right to register as an elector and to vote in elections, right? If I'm doing that, it sounds like, in fact, I can't do it if I am a part of a political action committee or a political campaign.
And then keep reading to lines 46 and 47.
Yes, so we'll keep reading out loud, okay?
Okay.
Or she or he is acting directly or indirectly on behalf of, or, hold on, let's start. We'll just read the whole thing straight through. We need to apprise, if we apprise them of their registration of selected service or arranges for or assist one or more public school student to register to vote, shall attest in writing that he or she is not acting directly or indirectly on behalf of and will not provide any student directory information to any candidate campaign, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But your thing is, it says ors, right? So it's
Or, and will not provide data, right? So you're not going to provide student directory information to a candidate or campaign. So if you're going on there to speak on behalf of, that's great. If you're going on there to get a sign-up sheet for kids, that's different, because now you're bypassing school administrators to get the private contact information of minors.
your and is slipping in there. Maybe you're saying the line on line 46, you're saying that and means if you're doing one of these things and, it's both and is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. My questions are satisfied for now.
Okay.
Good
All
questions. Thank you, Senator.
Number 4.
I'm a little confused because okay, maybe Senator, I was going to ask about Section 2. Can you walk me through the intent behind that addition?
The reason for it, that they're not going to disclose to an unauthorized person any information that is exempted from public inspection. So, line 77, knowingly giving false information when registering people to vote, and or they're disclosing to an unauthorized person information that is exempted from public inspection. So, the impetus of this is that information of minors was being given to a third party without the consent of those minors or their parents.
So the intent here is to prevent that from happening. The concern being there are already laws in place to protect student information from being released that school districts have to follow.
That's FERPA, though.
That is FERPA, but the question that I have is the intent may be noble, but the penalty is a felony and up to 10 years in prison.
It's already a penalty. What we're saying is that we're only adding the part that if a third party is coercing children to act on their behalf, to gain information. None of us in this room, none of us in this General Assembly, I don't think, would go into a school under false pretenses to harvest data of children for political purpose and gain. This only ties together that if we are coercing children to do this heinous act, then it's linking it to what's already in code in section 21-2-225.
Yeah, but in the previous sections, there's some intent there.
This would only apply if there was intent. Yes.
Okay, but it says or.
I think we could certainly change that to an and.
Yeah.
If that's a friendly amendment that would, we don't want an and, we want the or.
I got a few more lights here.
Mr. Morelli's nodding that we need to keep the or. Okay.
Hold up, Senator from the second. Is that you at number 7?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question, and I may need, as always, legislative council help to find line 22. What is a local school system? Because then I see or public school at the secondary level. I'm just trying to understand what a local school system is by definition. Is that defined anywhere?
Batter up.
A local school system would be a county school system, an independent school system, or any, what the Constitution calls an area school system. I don't know if we've got any of those set up, but it would be a local school system. So that it is a commonly used term across the code to define a county or city school system.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. And to the author, any reason we didn't include private schools in this legislation? Because basically, if someone was to go do this at a private school, they would be allowed and have no penalties, because the way this is written, am I not correct?
Our observations of this were that it was occurring in multiple public schools. We did not see that this was happening, and also private schools maintain their own set of rules individually on who they're allowing on campus, and so we're giving them the freedom to do it. We're just trying to pass something that pertains to public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, Senator Steele, I keep beating the same horse, but I think we can get there. I'm not wrong. If we go back to line 45, so the way it's written, I just want to make sure we do what we say we want to do. The way that it's written, it says that if any of us comes onto a campus and we tell people about their right to vote or their right to Secret Service, then we have to attest in writing. That's where the beginning is. It says we shall attest in writing that we're not acting directly or indirectly on behalf of a campaign, and we will not, virtue of going on the campus, you've been invited to go speak at the high school. When you accept that invitation, as this is written, you will need to write and attest that when you go and speak, you will not do this on behalf of a campaign and you will not collect student data. That's fine. We can, but to whom are we attesting that to? Where does that, who's keeping that attestation? Like, that's my question, because it's not if you do these things then you need to say something. It's saying it in advance. that you will not do these things?
Lines 66 and 67, the State Board of Education shall promulgate rules and regulations to carry out this code section.
So you're suggesting that every time an organization, third party, senators go and speak, Delta Sigma Theta goes on campus, that the state board is going to provide some form that every person needs to sign that says, hey, I'm not going to talk to 2 students, or if I talk to 2 students, I'll be sure that I don't register, I don't do this on behalf of a campaign, and I don't collect their data. That's what you're saying. For every invitation that we get, we would need to fill out an attestation from the school board in order to do this.
If the State Board of Education says after we pass this, if they say that that's what they want to have happen, or if they do a blanket policy with that, I think the State Board of Education needs to be able to dictate what that's going to be. But I don't see anything wrong with that, Senator. I don't see a problem. I don't go to schools so often that it's such a horrible inconvenience for me to have to fill out a little piece of paper that says, no, I'm not going to steal your kids' data, and then I'm going to ship it off somewhere else and not let them know where it went and use it for political purposes.
Again, I'm not disagreeing with the premise of what you're suggesting that we should do. I'm just asking about the implementation process. I 100% agree with you that we should not be stealing children's data, full stop. Please hear me on that. I'm just asking simply about how we ensure that folks can comply to this. And I'm particularly concerned about the Women of League of Voters, you know, these good do-gooder folks who come on the campuses.
They don't fall into this category, though.
But they do by virtue of being a third party who is located on the school property, and they apprise one or more. So you could just talk to one public school student about their right to register. That conversation right there makes them have to have filled out an attestation, and it says they shall attest in writing that they are not directly acting on behalf of a campaign, and that they will not steal student data. Like that's what this language currently says.
They will attest to that, but I don't think that this bill is worried about anything they've done or have done, and there's nothing in this bill that addresses it. It's going to create them signing a document that says we're not going to do the bad thing.
All right, well, we got a few more lights here. Let's give everybody else. Mr. Whip, do you have a question?
Real quick, I just want to clarify on 66. Look, I carry my daughter to school, and if I get her there 3 minutes late, I got to sign a clipboard and fill out an excuse form, and I don't even get to walk her in the school now because of school security. They let her in. Do you feel that 66 and 67 is very reasonable, and that those responsible for making these rules could make these rules? And every time I've been to a school, I don't see a whole lot of politicians on campus. I see firefighters, fire trucks, and other things like that. So do you see this as being an inconvenience for individuals who want to go on campuses, do this kind of work, that they have to fill out a form?
With all the folks in education that I've talked to about this, no one has ever brought up the fact that this is going to create extra work or headaches or hassles for them to be able to do it. No, I don't.
And would you agree that everything we're going through on school campuses now, me as a father, I would kind of like to know who's been on campus visiting my daughter and other classes. Would that not be a reasonable expectation of a father?
100%.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Number 15, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield to my friend from Northeast Georgia, get all this cleared up.
All right. Senator?
We're going to say the same thing.
Yeah. All right, clean it up.
So my understanding with this bill is you're not saying that if I am a political group and I get invited to speak on a campus by the young Democrats or the young Republicans, I can still go in, I can share information, but if my purpose and I go onto campus and I inform students of their right to vote, I can't then take not right to vote, how to register. I then can't take their information and give it to a candidate or another organization that would want that information to use to send mailers or to get their cell phone number. But basically, you can go on campus and share your message, but if you go on campus to register students to vote, you then can't take their information and basically sell it or use it and send it to another campaign.
That's 100% correct.
Okay. At the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay, hold that thought just 1 minute. Senator, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Be quick if you can, please.
Yep, I'll be quick. I just want to make sure. I think we all agree on the purpose and the intent I think my concern is the way it's written. The way it's written, the way I see it right now, is that if you were with the NAACP, if you were with Greater Georgia, Kelly Loeffler's group, who has registered high school students across the state, you will no longer be able to go on campus and register those students. That's the way it's written, because it's not about sharing information. It's about obtaining information. It will not provide any student directory information to any candidate or campaign committee, and then you keep going, and it says any political action committee or political organization. Political organization is very broad. So what that means is all of these organizations are political organizations. They will no longer be able to have these drives, because if they do, they are collecting, inherently they are collecting information.
They're not.
To register.
That's not how this works. Have you ever set up a voter registration in a school before?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. And you use
done
a
it
platform,
many times.
and you use a platform to do so. You're using a platform. You're not signing kids up on a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Okay, you can, but you have to be registered and coordinated with the Secretary of State. What you're not doing is line 90. 89 and 90. No candidate, campaign committee, or political action committee shall solicit any individual under the age of 18 to fraudulently organize an event on the property of any school system.
I think colleagues, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
It's very clear in the bill.
Your intent is clear. The way it's written is not, and it will significantly change and probably stop a lot of the voter registration and civic drives that occur at our schools, because they are in many parts of the state affiliated with C4s. C3s can be considered political organizations because they're not necessarily, it's not about candidates, it's about issues. And my concern is that this will impact that. But I appreciate your intent. I don't disagree with your intent. I very much agree with the intent.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Morelli and I spent a long time on this. Mr. Morelli, could you offer clarification on that for Senator Estevez, or is that another author that contributed that portion?
Tell you what, we'll let Stuart think about it. We do have one person signed up to speak, so why don't we knock that out, and maybe we'll come back. Mr. Don Hackney, if you want to come on, please, sir. Keep it quick, please, sir. I'm running way behind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a retired Atlanta attorney. I had some issues with 3 different sections of this bill, but I'll focus only on the one principally that Senator Jackson was talking about. New subsection D to section 20-2-310 is extremely problematic. It places a restriction on apprising students of their right to register and vote. Apprising students of their right to register and vote. That's what the bill deals with. It does not deal with voter registration. There's nothing more American to me than encouraging our youth to become educated voters. This law would become a trap for unsuspecting parents, election officials, nonprofit groups, elected officials, and others who simply are on campus to encourage student registration and voting. That's what this bill does. I believe that this is an unconstitutional restriction on our right to free speech. It places a prior restraint, a requirement of attestation, and I don't think any citizen of the state of Georgia would believe when they're in a school talking to school kids in any setting, and all they do is apprise them of their right to register and vote, that they have to sign some attestation, and if they don't, they're in violation of law. I think this is as a private citizen, I think this bill, the provisions about directories, the last section, in my humble opinion, is legislative overkill. Thank you.
Hold on, Don. Mr. Whip, do you have a comment or question?
So your argument is that anybody should be able to go on the campus and freely speak to students about whatever they want to talk about?
No, sir. I didn't.
That's my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there's a high school class that's putting on a program about our democracy, and they've invited the League of Women Voters, they've invited an election official, they've invited a local registrar, they've invited a nonprofit voting group, and they come on campus, and if they simply apprise students about their right to register and vote, they will have triggered this bill, and I suggest none of them will know that they've triggered this bill, which would require them to do an attestation. So
The attestation, though, wouldn't it be the responsibility of the school to make them aware of the requirement there?
it would be a good idea for the school, but
Based on Senator Still's legislation, it puts the responsibility of the DOE to provide that information, correct?
it requires the person who is apprising a student of their right to register or vote to sign an attestation.
Who's the person responsible for creating those rules and regs to make sure that person does sign that?
This bill gives that to the
To Department of Education, if you will. Is that not true?
That's correct. So
Okay, so if I go on there to do whatever, and look, the League of Women Voters go to Columbus High School every couple of years, and using the SOS platform, they register students to vote. And to be honest with you, I think it's reasonable. They are, let's be clear, guests on campus. No citizen has a free right to wander onto a campus and talk about anything they want to. So if the DOE has regulations, rules, and paperwork to fill out, and the person comes in there and in the paperwork that they fill out, the rules are there as what they can and cannot do, I'm not sure that would necessarily be a free speech thing. Now, if we wanted somebody to fill out something to go stand in a public park and preach their faith or preach their politics, I think you would have an argument there. But I think, and I respect your experience, I respect your profession, but I do think that with the public school, that the free reign that it seems like you're talking about doesn't exist to guests on campus. I think they can be managed within reason, and I think this bill does that, but I do appreciate your testimony.
thank you.
Thank you. So in your legal opinion, in this section, if a parent were at a football game on school property in the stadium, public school property, and they leaned over to the kid who was sitting next to them watching their brother play, and they said, hey, you know you're eligible to vote, isn't it true that they would be in violation of this section if they had not signed an attestation in advance, that they would be notifying or apprising a student of their right to vote?
I think that's exactly right.
Thank you.
Remember, the only thing that this bill attacks, if I may say that, is apprising a 17-year-old about the right to register and vote. This doesn't have to do with voter registration, doesn't have to do with making political comments. And that to me is, I can't imagine we would ever restrict in any way somebody saying to a student that they have the right to register and vote, which is what this Section D does.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Hatman. Senator, you want quick closing comments, and then we're going. I think we got a motion out there somewhere. We'll go back to and.
I'll be brief. Senator, it does not prohibit free speech. What it prohibits is from organizations or individuals fraudulently, and that word is used very deliberately in this bill. Two parents talking at a football game is not fraudulently representing themselves on a campus. You and I both know the difference of what we're talking about here. We are not restricting anyone's ability for kids anyone to talk to, answer questions. But if an organization, a PAC, a campaign fraudulently represents themselves as something they are not, or recruits or entices minors to do their bidding for them, keyword minors, to do their bidding for them, that is against the law with the passage of this bill. That is all we are trying to do, is to close that loop. We are not trying to upend First Amendments in any way, shape, or form. And with all due respect to the previous gentleman that just testified on it, he missed that key word, fraudulently. So we've put extreme emphasis on that, but that is the impetus, that is the purpose, that is what was debated in the many hours of that. I ask your favorable consideration of this bill.
All right, number 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the author, I 100% agree with your intent of this bill. To my friend, Senator Jackson, that's a good scenario that you brought up about just being at a football game on school grounds. I think that may capture this. In the spirit of moving the bill forward, I know we're getting close to crossover. If it's okay with you, I'd like to speak with Senator Jackson and just make sure we don't have any unintended consequences, because I don't want a parent who just talks to a kid at a football game to get in trouble. And I know that's not the intent, which is why I'd be committed to working with you to make sure that's ironed out, and working with Senator Jackson to make sure that if we can move the bill forward today, maybe before it receives final passage in the Senate, we can fix that, just to make sure that that's not captured in this bill.
Hold on. Mr. Leader,
Thank you. I just wanted to look at, because you mentioned about prospect fraudulently on page 489 through 91. Because I just wanted clarification. Can a political action committee or candidate now organize a student on campus to do anything? Can they do that now?
No, they can't, but what we have seen evidence of in the first, fourth, and fifth largest school districts in the state was that it was happening, and it did happen this past year.
And I would actually agree with that. So why would we say fraudulently organize? We don't want them to organize it at all, right?
We don't want them to organize it all, but if they are invited to, for example, if young Democrats wanted to organize on school, and it's with the invitation of the administration, they should be allowed to do so. I think with the question that you're asking, it would prohibit that, and I think that they should be allowed to be invited on. What they can't do is fraudulently go on, represent themselves as something they're not.
That's interesting. So we don't mind if candidates actually go on to someone under 17 to influence elections?
Well, there are young Democrats, there are young Republicans, clubs. They invite elected officials to come and speak, that they've come with faculty approval. What they're not doing is saying that they're coming in as Greenpeace or some other unrelated organization. I happen to love a lot of things that a lot of environmental groups do, but they're not coming in as that and then representing themselves as something else and then feeding that data in another direction.
All right, number 15.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to pass LC 47-9002.
All right.
Senate Bill 212.
Got a motion, and I heard a second. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to add in that discussion on working to perfect the legislation before final passage, that we consider those that come from naval or military bases to talk to students about selective service that are not employees of the school district, but are active duty military personnel that come in to speak to those ROTC students, because they would have no idea about that. I have a very good friend that is a lieutenant that comes from Jacksonville to speak to high school students, and she is in the state of Florida, but she would have no knowledge of this, and I don't want her to be caught in that.
All right. Thank you, Senator. And I think the senator from the 50th has said he'd be willing to work and help fine tune here. So we got a motion and a second on the floor. We've had some discussion. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All right. Any opposed? All right. Thank you. You got a bill, Senator. Appreciate it. All right, members, thank y'all for your patience. Appreciate everybody being here. We're adjourned.